My stepkids said I came for someone else's bread. I packed up, canceled every card, and drove away. A week later, their mother found out exactly what kind of bread it was and who'd been paying for it. Subscribe to the channel and share your stories in the comments. And now, let's get started. I always believed that family wasn't about blood, but about actions. That's something I used to say a lot, to friends, coworkers, anyone who brought up how complicated stepfamilies can be. My name's Dan. I'm 44, I live near Austin, and I've got 2 kids from my first marriage, Chloe, who's 15, and Jake, who's 12. I've been a carpenter most of my life, the kind of guy who comes home with sawdust still on his clothes and hands that smell like pine. 3 years ago, I married Lisa. She has a son from her previous marriage, Mason, 17 now. Mason's dad, Colin, is the type who loves the idea of being a father but not the work. You know, the kind social media full of proud dad posts, smiling photos at birthdays, quick weekend visits where he shows up with a new pair of sneakers or a fancy gadget. Then he disappears for months. No doctor appointments, no parent-teacher meetings, no late-night drives when a kid's stranded somewhere. Just a digital presence and a few grand gestures. I was the opposite. I don't like attention. I like being dependable. When I married Lisa, I didn't want Mason to feel like he was losing something. I wanted him to feel like he gained someone. I handled things quietly. I added him to my health insurance, helped him with his first car, set up a small credit card in his name to teach him responsibility. I took him to the DMV, the dentist, the doctor, all the little things that make up real parenting, the things no one posts about online. The first year, it felt almost normal. We had family dinners. I helped him with school projects, built him a desk for his room, even taught him how to change a tire. Chloe and Jake looked up to him. They thought of him as their big brother. There were movie nights, birthdays, weekend trips to the lake. It wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful, and I honestly thought, this is working. But somewhere along the line, Mason started to pull away. I can't even pinpoint when it began. Maybe when he got his license, maybe when Colin started texting him more often. It started small. Skipping dinners, short answers, rolling his eyes when I spoke. At first, I blamed it on teenage mood swings. Lisa said, he's just adjusting. He's had a lot of changes. And I believed her. I wanted to believe her. Then came the small cracks that you almost miss until they widen too far. He stopped calling me Dan and just started saying, hey. He'd come home and walk straight to his room. He stopped including us in his plans, started hiding his phone when he texted. And still, I tried to be patient. I told myself that if I just kept showing up, kept being steady, he'd see that I wasn't trying to replace his dad. I was trying to be there. One morning, everything changed. It was a regular Tuesday. I was up early, making breakfast before work. Bacon, eggs, toast, the usual. Lisa was upstairs getting ready for her office job. Chloe was finishing some homework. Jake was half asleep at the table. Mason came downstairs, headphones around his neck, phone in his hand, scrolling as he sat down. I poured him orange juice like I always did. Morning, I said. He grunted something without looking up. I brushed it off, normal teenage stuff. But then, as I was telling Jake to grab his backpack, Mason said it. Not loudly, not even angrily, just under his breath, flat and cold. You're not my dad. Stop using your last name with me. The words hit harder because of how casually they were delivered. He didn't even look up from his phone. The kitchen went silent. Chloe froze mid-bite, her fork halfway to her mouth. Jake stared at me, confused. For a second, even the hum of the refrigerator sounded too loud. I don't know what expression I had, but I remember my hands trembling slightly as I put down the spatula. I didn't yell. I didn't even respond right away. I just looked at him. This kid I'd been raising, driving around, worrying about, and all I could think was, you have no idea what you just said. Lisa came down a few seconds later, asking what happened. I said, nothing, and went to grab my jacket. Mason stood up, still staring at his phone, and walked out. That was it, no fight, no screaming. Just one sentence that rewrote everything. The rest of that day felt blurry. I went to work, but I barely focused. Every nail I hammered, every cut I measured, my mind replayed that moment. It wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. Like all those years meant nothing. Like everything I'd done was just an unwanted bonus. I got home late, and Lisa tried to talk to me about it. "He didn't mean it," she said softly. "He's just confused, trying to assert himself." But it wasn't confusion. It was clarity, his clarity. He had drawn a line, and I heard it loud and clear. He didn't see me as family. That night, I sat in my office, the small room I built into a workspace, and stared at the framed photo on my desk. Me, Lisa, and the kids at the lake last summer. Everyone was smiling, Mason's arm around Jake's shoulder. A perfect little lie captured in one photo. I realized then that family isn't something you declare. It's something you maintain. And when someone rejects that, no amount of good intentions can fix it. I didn't say anything that night. I didn't plan some big speech or confrontation. I just went quiet. Sometimes silence is more powerful than words. But in my head, I made a decision. If he didn't want my name, my presence, or my role, fine. Let's see how life feels without what comes with it. It wasn't anger. It was acceptance. A cold kind of peace settled in me. For years, I thought love and patience could build a bridge strong enough to carry all the weight of a broken past. That morning proved me wrong. The illusion of family had cracked. Quietly, cleanly, with one line spoken over breakfast. And I knew, from that moment on, things would never go back to the way they were. I didn't say a word to Mason for the rest of that day, or the next. Sometimes, silence does more than any argument could. It forces people to feel the space they've created. But this silence wasn't meant to punish, it was me giving myself distance. Enough to think clearly. That night, I sat in my office again, door half closed, the hum of the old ceiling fan filling the room. The house was quiet except for the faint sound of Mason's music upstairs. I looked through my drawer, bills, statements, receipts, the unglamorous evidence of responsibility. For years, I had handled it all. Phone plans, car insurance, gas money, medical copays, his school laptop, even his gym membership. Mason never knew what anything cost because he never had to. That's when a thought settled in, not out of spite but clarity. If I'm not his dad, then maybe it's time he learns what life without one feels like. The next morning, I started making calls. First, I called the bank to remove Mason from the secondary card. The woman on the phone asked if I wanted to deactivate it immediately. "Yes," I said. "Right now." Then the insurance company. I explained the situation, told them to remove him from my auto policy. That one hit me harder than I expected. I remembered the day we added him. How excited he'd been, holding his learner's permit, thanking me like it actually meant something. Next, the phone company. Mason's line had always been under my name, part of a family plan. I asked them to transfer it to his father's name. They said they'd need Colin's information to complete it. I sent Colin a text. "Need your details for Mason's line. He'll be under your plan now." No explanation. No argument. Just facts. I went through every shared subscription, every small convenience. Streaming services, online storage, gym membership. All of it tied to my account. By the end of the morning, Mason wasn't connected to a single thing that required my payment information. Then I made a list, neat, detailed, itemized, of everything I'd been covering for him each month. Gas money, $120. Insurance, $220. Phone, $90. School fees and expenses, $130. Miscellaneous, $80. Total, $640. I attached a note at the bottom, "Your son, your responsibility." Then I sent it to Colin. For a moment, I stared at the screen, wondering if I'd gone too far. But then I thought about that morning in the kitchen. His tone, the way he didn't even look up, and the doubt faded. The first call came 3 days later. I was on a job site installing cabinets when my phone buzzed. It was Mason. "Hey," he said quickly, his voice tight. "My card's not working." "Oh," I said. "Yeah, I deactivated it." "What? Why?" I wiped my hands on my jeans and leaned against the counter. "You told me not to use my last name with you, so I stopped attaching it to your expenses." There was silence on the line, That heavy kind of silence where you know the other person doesn't have a comeback yet. Then he hung up. By evening, Lisa called. I could hear the tension in her voice before she even spoke. Dan, what did you do? Mason's losing it. I honored what he said, I replied. He doesn't want me involved. I'm respecting that. Dan, come on. He's just a kid. He's 17. Old enough to know that words mean something. That night, Mason came storming into my office. His face was red, jaw tight, fists clenched. You embarrassed me, he shouted. My friends saw my card decline at the gas station. You made me look stupid. I looked up from my desk. No, I said calmly. You made yourself look stupid when you told me I wasn't your dad. I just stopped pretending to be one financially. He glared at me, waiting for me to yell back. But I didn't. I just looked at him, and I think that scared him more than if I had shouted, because there was no anger left, just quiet certainty. He muttered something under his breath and slammed the door on his way out. I heard him upstairs yelling at Lisa, blaming her, blaming me, blaming everyone but himself. That night, Lisa and I barely spoke. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. You could have talked to me first, she said softly. Would it have changed anything? I asked. She didn't answer. The next morning, Mason's phone line was officially transferred. His number still worked, but now the billing went to Colin. Within hours, Colin texted me, You can't just dump this stuff on me out of nowhere. Why not? I replied. He's your son. Remember? No response. Days passed. The silence in the house grew heavier. Mason stopped coming down for breakfast. He skipped dinner most nights, stayed in his room, barely spoke to anyone. Lisa tried to bridge the gap, asked me to reconsider, said I'd made my point. But I wasn't doing this to make a point. I was doing it to make a change. It wasn't revenge, it was a reset. I had spent 3 years trying to prove that love and responsibility could make someone feel like family. But it doesn't work if only one side believes in it. Sometimes, the only way to teach someone what they have is to take it away. By the end of the week, Mason's car sat untouched in the driveway. No insurance, no gas money. His phone was on a cheaper plan his dad barely paid for. His school lunch account went negative. The kid who once acted like he didn't need me suddenly looked lost in his own house. One evening, Lisa came into my office again, frustration written all over her face. He's falling apart, Dan. He's angry. He's embarrassed. Good, I said quietly. Maybe he'll learn something from it. She sighed. You're supposed to be the adult. I am. That's why I'm not arguing or yelling. I'm teaching him the one lesson no one else ever has. That words have weight, and respect has a price. She didn't like hearing that. Maybe part of her felt guilty too, for letting Mason treat me the way he did without stopping him. Later that night, when the house was dark, I stood in the doorway of Mason's room. He was asleep, his phone face down on the desk, screen cracked, charger barely working. For the first time, he looked like a kid again. Not the arrogant teenager who'd pushed me away. Just a boy who didn't understand the full cost of what he'd said. I closed the door quietly and went back to bed, knowing I wouldn't sleep much. People think revenge feels good. It doesn't. What I felt was something colder, quieter. The peace that comes from finally putting responsibility where it belongs. Mason wanted independence. Now he had it. And for the first time since that morning, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not anger, not guilt, just resolve. Because I realized something simple and painful that night. You can give a person comfort, structure, and every opportunity in the world, but if they don't value it, it's nothing more than background noise. The only way they'll ever appreciate it is when the silence replaces it. The following week felt like walking through the aftermath of a storm that no one wanted to admit had happened. The house wasn't loud anymore. No slamming doors, no music blasting upstairs, no arguing over whose turn it was to take out the trash. Just silence. Lisa tried to keep the peace, but there's only so much smoothing over you can do when the fracture's already deep. Mason kept his distance. He went from angry to quiet, and that quiet was worse. He didn't ask for rides, didn't sit at the table, didn't even come into the kitchen when I was there. He lived like a tenant who didn't want to bump into his landlord. And maybe that was fair. That's the relationship he wanted. By the third day, Colin finally called. Not a text this time, a real phone call, angry from the start. "You can't just drop all this crap on me out of nowhere, Dan." "Why not?" I said. "You're his father." "Yeah, but you've been taking care of that stuff. You can't just expect me to." "I can expect you to do exactly what being a parent means." He went quiet for a moment, then muttered something about how I was teaching the kid the wrong lesson. But we both knew what this was really about. Colin didn't like being reminded that he'd outsourced his responsibilities to someone else. After that call, I sat at my desk for a long time, staring at the phone. I wasn't proud of what I'd done, but I didn't regret it either. There's a difference. Pride is about ego. Regret is about conscience. My conscience was clean. Meanwhile, reality began catching up with Mason. His phone service got downgraded, his car insurance lapsed, his gas tank stayed empty. One afternoon, I saw him standing in the driveway, staring at his car, keys in hand but no way to drive. That image stuck with me. The kid who once rolled his eyes at every rule suddenly looked like he was facing the world for the first time without a net. A few nights later, Lisa and I were having dinner, just the two of us. The kids were in their rooms. She was quiet, pushing food around her plate. Finally, she said, "He's been looking for a part-time job." "That's good," I said. She looked up at me, her eyes sharp. "Don't you think this has gone far enough?" "Far enough for who?" "For all of us," she said. "You proved your point." "It's not about a point, Lisa. It's about principle. He wanted separation, now he's living it." She sighed. "You're turning this into some kind of lesson." "It is a lesson. Life doesn't hand you comfort after you spit on the person providing it." She didn't respond, just stood up and started washing the dishes. The sound of running water filled the room, and for a moment I felt the weight of it all. The exhaustion, the distance, the ache of watching something you built start to crumble. But then, 3 nights later, something changed. I was in my office again, sanding a piece of oak trim for a client's project, when Mason knocked on the door. It was the first time he'd approached me since the argument. He didn't come in right away, just stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets. "Can I talk to you?" he said quietly. I nodded. He stepped in and closed the door behind him. For a second, neither of us spoke. He looked older somehow, not in his face, but in the way he carried himself. "I was wrong," he said finally, "about what I said. I didn't think it would all fall apart like that." His voice cracked a little at the end. It wasn't dramatic, just honest. The kind of honesty that doesn't come easily to a 17-year-old. I put down the sandpaper and turned to face him. "I appreciate the apology," I said, "but I need you to understand something. This isn't about punishment. This is about accountability." He nodded, looking at the floor. "I know. I just didn't realize how much you did until it was gone." "That's usually how it goes," I said quietly. "Most people don't notice the support until it disappears." He looked up, eyes a little wet. "I'm gonna try to fix it. I'll get a job. I'll pay my own stuff. I just don't want things to stay like this." I believed him, not because he sounded desperate, but because he sounded sincere. Still, I knew that if I restored everything overnight, he'd learn nothing. "I'm not putting everything back," I said. "Not yet. You'll earn it. Start with the job. Take responsibility. Show that you mean it." He nodded again, slower this time. "Okay." Then, after a pause, he added, "I get it now." When he left the room, I sat there for a while, staring at the spot where he'd been standing. For the first time in weeks, I felt something shift. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. Sometimes a lesson doesn't need to be shouted to be learned. Over the next few days, Mason started changing in small ways. He woke up early, went out to drop off applications. He started doing chores without being asked. Simple things like taking out the trash, mowing the lawn. I didn't make a big deal out of it, but I noticed. One evening, I found him in the garage, trying to change the oil in his car. He had the tools laid out, watching a tutorial on his cracked phone screen. I walked over, picked up a wrench, and showed him how to loosen the filter. We didn't talk much, but we didn't need to. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was cooperative. Lisa saw it too. She didn't say it out loud, but I could tell she was relieved. She started cooking dinners again, trying to bring everyone to the same table. The house slowly started to feel alive again. Not like before, but different, quieter, more deliberate. Then, one afternoon, Colin called again. His tone was different this time. Not angry, just tired. "I don't know how you handled all this," he said. "I can barely keep up with the phone bill, let alone everything else." I didn't respond right away. Then I said, "You get used to it when you actually do it." He sighed. "Yeah, I guess so." When I hung up, I thought about something I'd heard once. That being a father isn't about sharing DNA. It's about showing up even when no one notices. Maybe Colin finally understood that too. A few days later, Mason got a job at a hardware store about 10 minutes from home. He came home that night with grease on his hands and a small paycheck stub folded in his pocket. He didn't brag about it, just showed me quietly, like it meant something. And it did. "Nice work," I said. "That's how it starts." He smiled. A small, genuine smile. And for the first time in months, I felt proud of him again. Life didn't go back to what it was before. Couldn't. But maybe that was the point. Some relationships don't need to return to the past. They need to rebuild into something stronger. One evening, I was sitting on the porch when Mason joined me. The sky was orange, the air still warm. He sat down without saying anything for a while, then asked, "Do you think you'll ever trust me like before?" I thought about it for a moment. Trust isn't something that resets, Mason. It grows again differently, but you're on the right path. He nodded, and we sat there in silence, watching the sun dip below the trees. For the first time in a long while, the quiet felt peaceful. That night, as I turned off the lights downstairs, I caught my reflection in the kitchen window and thought about everything that had happened. I wasn't proud of every decision I made, but I was proud that I finally stopped living in a one-sided version of family. Because sometimes love means holding on. Other times it means letting someone fall, just enough to make them want to climb back up. And that's exactly what he was doing. A week after Mason started his new job, the air in the house felt different. Not completely healed, but lighter. Like the dust after a storm finally began to settle. The sharp edges of silence softened into something close to peace. For the first time in months, mornings didn't start with tension. Sometimes he even joined me for coffee before heading out. No words about the past. No apologies repeated. Just quiet coexistence. I noticed small things. He began filling his own gas tank. Bought his own lunch. Stopped asking Lisa for cash. The boy who once rolled his eyes at responsibility was slowly turning into someone I could respect. Not because he suddenly liked me, but because he was trying. That mattered more than anything. Lisa noticed it too. She didn't say it directly. She just looked at me differently now, less frustrated, more understanding. One night while we were cleaning up dinner, she said quietly, "You were right. Sometimes people have to feel the consequences to really see what they had." I didn't gloat. I just nodded. Pain's a better teacher than comfort. Still, there were moments that tested the fragile peace. Colin called every so often, mostly to complain about the bills he was getting now that Mason wasn't under my name. He tried to guilt-trip me, saying, "I thought you cared about him." "I do," I said. "That's why I stopped enabling him." He hung up after that. Maybe it stung because it was true. Then one Friday evening, I got home from work to find Mason sitting on the porch steps, scrolling through his phone. He looked tired, his work shirt stained with dust, his hair messy. He held up a takeout bag. "Got extra food from work," he said. "Thought you might want some." It wasn't much, just a small gesture, but it meant something. I sat down beside him. We ate in silence, the crickets filling the spaces where our words used to fail. After a while, he said, "My manager told me I'm reliable." He said not many people my age show up early. I smiled. That's how respect starts, by doing the things nobody notices. He nodded. I didn't get that before. I know, I said. He didn't apologize again, and I didn't need him to. Some lessons are better seen than spoken. The next real shift happened a few weeks later, at Lisa's family gathering. It was one of those backyard barbecues she loved. Kids running around, folding chairs, laughter, the smell of grilled corn in the air. Her relatives came from all over. Cousins, uncles, her parents. I'd met them all before, but this time it felt different. I was quieter than usual, just happy to watch from a distance. Mason arrived later than everyone else, still in his work uniform. When he walked into the yard, a few people greeted him. Someone asked where he'd been keeping himself. He smiled a little and said, "Working, trying to catch up on being an adult." There was a mix of laughter and surprise. Even Lisa raised her eyebrows. At one point, a few of Lisa's cousins were talking about colleges and jobs, and someone turned to Mason. "So, you work at the hardware store now, right? How's that going?" He looked over at me before answering. "It's good. I'm learning a lot. My dad's been teaching me some stuff too, helping me out with tools and all that." He said it casually, mid-conversation, but I heard it clearly. My dad. Not stepdad. Not Dan. Dad. For a moment, I just stood there, beer halfway to my lips, pretending not to react. But inside, something unclenched. That one word carried more weight than any apology could. Lisa caught my eye from across the yard. She didn't say anything, just gave me a small nod, the kind that says you were right, but I'm glad you were. Later that night, when most of the guests had left, I was cleaning up the table when Mason walked over, helping without being asked. He stacked the plates, grabbed the trash bag, worked quietly beside me. When we were done, he said, "You know that time I said you weren't my dad?" I looked at him. "Yeah, I remember. I was being stupid. I thought if I pushed you away, it'd make me feel more grown up. But turns out, all it did was make me feel lost." I nodded. "That's usually how it works. We only realize what we've got once we've burned the bridge to it." He looked down for a second, then met my eyes. "I just wanted to say thanks for not giving up on me, even when I acted like you should." "I did give up," I said quietly, "but only on paying your bills, not on you." He laughed, a short, embarrassed laugh, and we both smiled. That was the moment I knew the lesson had finally landed. After that, things didn't suddenly become perfect, but they became real. Mason started asking for advice instead of money. We worked together on small carpentry projects, fixing a fence, repairing an old table. He asked questions, paid attention, and I could see him growing into someone solid. One evening, a few weeks later, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Colin. "How did you afford all that before? I can barely keep up." I stared at the screen for a moment, then forwarded the message to Mason. Underneath it, I typed, "This is why I only invest in people who value it." He didn't reply, but a few minutes later, he came downstairs and said, "I saw your message. I figured you would." He hesitated. "You weren't wrong." That night, Lisa sat next to me on the couch after everyone had gone to bed. She rested her head on my shoulder and said, "Now I understand what kind of bread you've been bringing into this house." I chuckled softly. "It's not money, Lisa. It's discipline, stability. Those are the things that feed a family." She smiled faintly. "Well, they finally taste it." The next weekend, Mason brought home his first real paycheck. It wasn't much, barely enough for gas and a few meals, but he was proud. He placed it on the kitchen table and said, "Can we open a bank account together? I want to do it right this time." I nodded. "Yeah, let's go Monday." We did. And when he handed that first deposit slip to the teller, I felt something shift again. Not pride in myself, but pride for him. He was finally building something of his own. In the months that followed, life became steady. No dramatic blow-ups, no harsh words. Just steady days, work, school, dinners, conversations. The kind of peace you don't realize you're missing until it returns. Sometimes I'd catch Mason joking with Chloe and Jake, or helping Lisa carry groceries, and I'd think back to that morning in the kitchen. The one line that broke everything open. I used to replay it with bitterness, but now I see it differently. Maybe that sentence was necessary. Maybe that was the moment we both stopped pretending and started learning what family really means. Because family isn't built from comfort. It's built from the moments that test it. When Mason introduced me as my dad at that barbecue, he probably didn't realize what it meant to me. But I did. It meant that the years of patience, frustration, and quiet sacrifice finally became visible. It meant the bridge we rebuilt was stronger than the one we lost. And sometimes that's all you can ask for. Not a perfect family, just one that finally understands the value of what you've built together. People often realize your worth only after everything you gave them disappears. I used to resent that truth, but now I accept it. Maybe that's the price of being someone dependable. You get noticed only when you're gone, or when you finally stop giving. But if you're lucky, like I was, they come back. Not to take, but to understand. And when they do, the silence that follows isn't empty anymore. It's earned.